Okay, thanks very much for the introduction, Darren. Much appreciated. And thanks to everybody for attending this session today. As Darren outlined, last autumn I was asked to get involved in what the TTF were doing, and specifically to look at some of the findings in the State of the Connected Nation publication concerning procurement. So can we go to the next slide, please? And the next. So what's the general context? Why should we be concerned about how technology and data is procured? And just drawing on an extract from the introduction to the report, the local road networks are, as we know, of critical importance to communities and our national economy, connect businesses of all sizes, workers to their places of employment, and people to their families. And if we look back in October 2018, the government announced significant spend on local roads between 2020 and 25. And of that sum of money, that sum of investment, a significant amount was targeted in the use of smart technology and data to raise the performance of the local roads network. So in that context, procuring technology and data, doing it efficiently, and really acting as an enabler to modernize the road networks becomes more and more important. And what we could see in the State of the Connected Nation report is that I think it's fair to say that people viewed procurement as a real challenge, both in terms of what they were trying to do in a very fast-moving environment, and also in their perception of how public procurement actually works, because it is regulated through something called the public contract regulations. And there are probably, it's fair to say, a number of misconceptions about how complex that can be. And I think what we look to do in the guidance is, I think, break some of those myths and actually focus on what good procurement looks like. And I think really importantly, draw on the experiences of the TTF community, because one thing that really struck me during the course of this work is that my experience tends to be more in some very large major projects. And it really struck me just how much those types of projects could learn from the good work that's undertaken by practitioners in local authorities and in the market that you're working in. So next slide, please. So why do we need this guidance document? Let's start with some of the challenges. As we've described, we're all trying to adapt to the changing nature of the goods and services that authorities procure. We want to adopt good practice. We want to be the best that we can be in a rapidly evolving market. There is a much larger movement, I think, behind procurement to focus on outcomes and wider socioeconomic benefits in how public money is spent. So you can see that in the changes that are happening to the HM Treasury Green Book for project evaluation. You can see it in the wider implementation of social value, the Social Value Act. And you can see it as well in kind of some emerging documents that are out there, such as the Construction Innovation Hub and the Construction Playbook. So another challenge, I think, is understanding that legal context that I talked about, the options available and how best to navigate the public contract regulations. We really try and simplify this in the guidance document. We want this to be not to reinvent the wheel so much. We want to really focus on some of the behaviours and good practices that you need to deploy in procurement. So, and as I've said, I think the challenge around best practice is really that a lot of good work goes on out there, and it's not perhaps shared frequently enough. We often move on to the next project or the next challenge. I think the guidance document has provided a good opportunity to reflect on that good practice, some real life case studies, and hopefully that helps people interpret what good procurement really looks like. Next slide, please. So our approach. We felt that it was important to provide that snapshot of projects in the TTF community, and we wanted to really place the guidance on some solid foundations. And we referred to, this is a publication that I had involvement in developing back in around 2011-12, which is called the Project Initiation Route Map, which is published by the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. So a very good piece of guidance came out from the IPA in 2016, which outlined something called the 6 pillars of procurement. And I think in my experience, it provides probably the most easily interpretable model for what good procurement looks like. And it's been really interesting testing that with some local authority practitioners who've found it very useful and making more use of it. The case studies, I've provided just a sample of those case studies that we looked at. We looked at the work that was taking place in Oxfordshire, City of York, Hull, Transport for West Midlands, and the guidance is interspersed with a number of case studies to really try and bring things to life. So I hope that all makes it, I think, guidance that we can relate to and guidance that hopefully doesn't just gather dust on a shelf. We think it makes for an interesting read. So, and next slide, please. So this is the 6 pillars of procurement model that we use to ground the guidance on. I'll just take you through what those 6 pillars of good procurement look like. So pillar number 1 is all about communicating your requirements. And I can't emphasize enough that good procurement really starts with having a really well-defined set of outcomes. What is it that you're trying to achieve? What are the critical success factors that will define those outcomes and what success looks like? And what kind of performance indicators do you expect to see them that will demonstrate ultimately that you've achieved those outcomes? So the more time that is spent in that particular one, pillar 1 is really sets the foundation for the success of the rest of the procurement exercise. Pillar number 2, I nearly said step there, but pillar 2 is all about the marketplace and really understanding the capacity and capabilities of the market that you're operating in and the supplies that exist. And I think I was really struck by the number of not just small to medium-sized enterprises or SMEs, but the number of micro organizations that are out there that are feeding into, that really want to access the type of projects that are being delivered. And they're producing some really innovative things like traffic sensors or data models that we all want access to, but historically have been a little bit hard to encourage them to access public procurement tenders. So building that understanding of what the supply chain can do, critically important. Pillar number 3 is something that's less well understood, which is about packaging. So when we have a larger project, breaking it down into components and clusters of procurement that will provide for a much more competitive tender and procurement. So what you want to do through our packaging is really attract as many interested parties as possible, generate a really healthy competition. And to do that, and you can see this in the kind of cyclical nature between pillar 2 and pillar 3, is really you want to iterate that, optimize the packages that you ultimately put out to tender. It enables a really healthy competition and you get best value for money. Pillar number 4 is about choosing the right contract model. And fundamentally, that comes down to risk allocation. And what I've seen through the work is that there are some very forward-thinking approaches to how that risk is managed, less transactional in short. So less cost or price-based procurement, and looking at more innovative ways of structuring a financial model in collaboration with the supply chain that creates a win-win scenario. Pillar number 5 is very much about in the public sector around the legal context, which is choosing the right route to market. And the public contract regulations provide a number of different routes, and you can structure those in a number of different ways, single stage, multi-stage. You may choose to access a framework. And what we do provide in the guidance is a really up-to-date list of the Crown Commercial Services frameworks that exist for, so local authorities don't need to reinvent the wheel. They can access existing frameworks to to carry out their tenders. Pillar number 6 is all about benefits communication. So this is very much about demonstrating that what you set out to do was actually achieved. And this links back to pillar 1 and the definition of those key performance indicators. So it's very much about at the end of the project reflecting on what you did through procurement. Was it successful? And then using that to inform the next exercise. So I've provided a handy link there. There is quite an extensive suite of information around the IPA route map, and it's available for everybody to access. But I think we do draw on some of the key points for the TTF guidance. Next slide, please. So, not being a transport technology expert, I think that in the case studies, I'd like to just focus on the key learning from just a sample of some of the case studies that we include in the guidance. The first is with Transport for West Midlands and the new £8 million consortium to develop new transport products. So otherwise known as Project Convex. I think the learning that we got from this case study was that, again, it emphasized the importance of establishing clear and robust minimum requirements. They used critical success factors to define the outcomes they were trying to achieve. They structured the procurement to allow for research and development phase, and then worked collaboratively with the supply chain in developing their procurement strategy. So some really good things there from Project Convex. Next slide, please. Now, Oxford County Council, the IHUB, this is probably the one case study that illustrated some really good practice across all of the 6 pillars. So we go into those in further depth in the guidance, but this concerned the procurement of a new transport model. So Oxford really wanted to benefit from new and larger data sources and carry out many more scenario tests with faster processing and interpretation speeds. So rather than procuring an existing system with less functionality and perhaps through an established service provider, they wanted to go out to the supply chain and say, well, what's the art of the possible? What can you bring to this opportunity? And I think Oxford had a really simple and clear vision for the next generation model that kept the objectives simple and gave the supply chain a lot of opportunity to innovate. They did that through soft market engagement. They did that in a number of ways, from industry conferences to a speed dating approach with a very broad selection of SMEs. The approach that they took to contract risk management, so this brings us to pillar 4 of the route map, the procurement module, is to make it less transactional, utilize an R&D phase, and then create this potential for IP, and that in itself could be used to offset the cost of developing the product. So a really good example of how it is possible to generate these much more forward-thinking win-win scenarios with the supply chain. So I thought this was a great example, and I'm actually using it to illustrate two larger projects, the benefits of supply chain engagement, which I think is a theme that runs through the guidance. Next slide, please. Now, some of the case studies that we looked at are actually much smaller in value, and encompass the procurement of things like cameras or live telemetry and closer technology, such as the example of City of York STEP program. So what was really interesting about this is the work that the project manager did in identifying existing routes to market via the Crown Commercial Services frameworks. They had a really good understanding of the capability and capacity of the supply chain pre-procurement, and they worked with their supply chain to develop the specifications. But ultimately, what that led to was a kind of speed of procurement. They managed to do what they did in a very short space of time, and I think we can all learn from that. There's a perception out there that the regulations and public procurement can be very slow and cumbersome. It's really all about good preparation and forward planning. So next slide, please. Okay, so what are the key messages? Now, with that idea in mind that we want to keep things simple, and we want people to take away some key points from the procurement guidance. We've produced a short takeaway, a one-pager that describes 10 key things that practitioners can use in their next procurement exercise or a procurement activity. The first one, and again, it is that common theme, but engaging with the market and understanding your supply chain is so important. We frequently jump to trying to understand how we'll share risk with the supply chain, what type of contract we'll use, but fundamentally, I think having a really good understanding of the supply chain that you're working with is key to success. In terms of data, understanding what type of data is available out there. It's it was described to me by one practitioner as a little bit like the Wild West, procuring data, which is quite interesting. So there's lots of different types of data. How can you use it to gain insights, and how can you access it, and access it cost effectively? So it really is worth exploring that, which links to the next point, which is go wide, source benchmarks for the cost of data. It can be quite volatile, so perhaps don't focus too much on the first piece of information that you get. Just explore what's out there. Number 4, focus on outcomes, not the delivery approach. Focusing on those outcomes means that we have a almost broader set of requirements. It allows suppliers to innovate. Step 5, structure that procurement to achieve value and wider benefits, because that is definitely going to happen, and it is coming. There will be change in how public services and works are procured, and I think the more that we're prepared for that, the better. As was pointed out to me, looking at the case study in Hull, is that not all our R&D is successful. Things that are truly innovative, you have to accept that in some ways that R&D may fail. And structuring the procurement to manage the associated risk and protect both the authorities' interests and the supply chains is a really healthy approach to take. Item 7, there are routes that are seldom used and perhaps less known about, such as innovation partnerships. So if genuine IP exists, consider that type of procurement route. The guidance does provide material that you can access to look into that further. And then data and IP value can often offset the cost of development and maintenance of new products or services. And I think a lot of the hard work has been taken out of procurement in terms of establishing frameworks, can be accessed. The Crown Commercial Services has easily a good half dozen different types of framework that local authorities can access. So in some ways, suppliers actually knowing what those routes are can help them perhaps if they're dealing with a less experienced client. And then finally, a good rule of procurement: keep it simple, follow the 6 pillars and access the support that's out there. There is plenty of it. And I hope that we've been able to signpost some of that within the guidance. And I'm very pleased to see it published. And I'm hoping that personally I'll be using it in discussions with other public bodies about how to do things well. So thanks very much for taking the time to listen to me this afternoon, and I hope it's been helpful. It's been a pleasure to work with the TTF on developing this guidance.